Greetings everyone, this is Peter Skov for Music is a Journey. I am doing part 2 of my Deep Purple Family Albums collection. In part 1 I explained my twice becoming interested in the band Deep Purple, and the second time, which was back in 2006, I really began to explore albums that the various members who have come and gone in the band over the years, various albums that they also participated on, whether they were members of a band or they were just doing on a guest or session work, whatever. So we got about halfway through, probably not quite, but anyway, it was getting to be a bit of a long video, so we're going to continue now. Before we get started though, I just wanted to mention 4 things, and off the top of my head at this moment I can only remember 3 of them. First of all, in the last video at the end, I was talking about Don Airey guesting on a couple of Whitesnake albums, and what I accidentally said in my haste was that he guested on a couple of Whitesnake vocals. And anybody who saw that might be wondering, does Don Airey sing? And if so, why would he sing on a Whitesnake album when he could be playing keyboards? Yeah, that was a slip of the tongue, and normally if I caught myself making such a mistake while editing the video, I would put in some little note at the bottom saying that I meant to say a couple of Whitesnake albums. So anyway, just so you know, I'm not that dumb. Okay, then another thing was, last weekend when I was making the video, I was coming out of some troublesome allergies, and occasionally I would rub my nose subconsciously. Again, normally when I edit my videos, I notice if I do such things, and if possible, I try to block it out by putting on an album cover or a picture or something. However, the last video I was trying to do with as little editing as possible, because I don't have so much time these days. I just thought, let's just do it and put it up. And so when I was watching it later, I noticed I rubbed my nose several times. I actually don't like that, because when I was first thinking about how I want to make my videos, I watched many different video channels of people presenting about music albums, and some of them were very professional, or at least very good, and there were some other ones where I thought they certainly could have done a lot to improve how they were doing things. So one of the videos I noticed, one guy, he was talking about some albums, and suddenly he just put the heel of his hand up to his nose and gave a good solid squishy rub and then continued talking. And I thought, man, you really could have cut that out. So I apologize for my frequent nose rubbing. Now, there's just a funny thing. When I was putting the video up on YouTube, I was typing on my Mac, and I'm pretty darn sure that I typed Deep Purple Family Albums Part 1. However, if you make a slight typo, like you don't quite hit the A when you're typing albums on a Mac, autocorrect kicks in. And it was as it was uploading, I noticed it said Deep Purple Family Bums Part 1. Thank goodness I caught that before it went public. And I think there were 4 things I wanted to say, 4 kind of disclaimers or apologies or whatever, and I cannot remember what the 4th one was. But just so you know, everything I am saying about these albums, it's just coming out of my head. There's no script, there was no rehearsal, there was no reviewing notes or anything like that. This is just what I remember reading back in 2006, 2007, 2008, at the time when I was collecting these. Alright, so without any more rambling, let's get on with it. So in the previous video, we talked about the Mark I and Mark II members, and now we're going to move on with Mark III. We're going to start here with Glenn Hughes, who was in a band called Trapeze before joining Deep Purple. This was their second album, Medusa, and what's interesting on here is that the guitarist is Mel Galley, who later on played with Whitesnake. I think he was on the Slide It In album, and also Dave Holland, drums, who was Judas Priest's drummer through the 1980s. So that's pretty cool to find those things out, you know, everybody's connected somehow. Anyway, the first album, I've never heard it, but I heard it had a lot of acoustic stuff to it. However, this one here, it's a little bit more of this kind of early 70s heavy rock. Some of the songs pretty heavy, some of them like Makes You Want to Cry, a little bit more groovy, but overall it's a pretty good kind of like proto-metal type album. Good heavy stuff anyway for that time. And then the other album, apparently after Medusa, they went and did a tour in the US, and Glenn Hughes was especially impressed by the kind of funky music that was going on in the US in the early 70s. So that really inspired him, and he changed his vocal style a lot. And also he tried to put more swagger into the music here. And this is the third trapeze album. You Are the Music, We're Just the Band. A lot of really cool, groovy, heavy numbers on here. Yeah, I quite like this. And again, it's the same lineup: Mel Galley, Dave Holland, and Glenn Hughes there on this album here. So these two I like. Maybe I should one day check out the first trapeze album. Not sure. Okay. Then, also I have this Glenn Hughes, This Time Round, an Anthology 1970 to 2007. Yeah, the legendary voice of rock. So a double disc, and this covers stuff with trapeze, Deep Purple, some solo stuff from the 70s, Hughes and Thrall, which I actually used to have on CD, but I sold it for some reason. Gary Moore, Black Sabbath, Glenn Hughes solo stuff again, more Glenn Hughes solo stuff, Iommi Hughes, and more Glenn Hughes. I actually have the Iommi Hughes album somewhere around here, and Glenn Hughes also did sing on, wasn't it, Seventh Star, Black Sabbath 7 Star featuring Tony Iommi. Yeah, apparently Glenn Hughes and Tony Iommi got along really well, and so that's why they went and did another album. But I think that's probably stuffed in with the Black Sabbath box, so I don't have it here to show. But yeah, there's that. So that's actually a pretty cool anthology. Lots of stuff from Glenn Hughes' past. Okay, and then a couple of other modern Glenn Hughes albums I picked up, at least modern at the time. Songs in the Key of Rock. That's an interesting font there. It was hard for me to read. Songs in the Key of Rock. And Music for the Divine. And there was actually a third one. I can't remember the name now. But this was actually part of a trilogy with the same members recording, including, I think it was the drummer from Red Hot Chili Peppers, perhaps. I don't remember exactly now. But yeah, anyway, so these are pretty cool. I mean, Glenn Hughes has got some funky and good rock tunes. He's got great vocals. I do really like his vocal style. So that's awesome. And then Glenn Hughes and Lynn Turner did a couple of albums together. Hughes Turner Project, and this was the first album, which is what you would expect from a funky hard rocker and a, I guess, more soulful hard, I don't know, I guess they're both kind of soulful and funky and groovy and a little bit hard rock and so on. So yeah, it's a pretty cool album here, which again, a lot of this stuff I really haven't listened to it now for about 10 years. So this morning I went and loaded it all into my smartphone to listen during my commutes. Okay, then next we're going to move on to David Coverdale. We talked about how he had been in the band The Government before joining Deep Purple, and where you can find some of those recordings, Pre-Purple People album. And then he went and did a solo thing, an album which he called Whitesnake, and a second one after that. And some of the songs from that second one ended up becoming Whitesnake songs when the band actually started up as Whitesnake. Now, if you know the early Whitesnake stuff, they're a blues-based rock and roll band. I know some songs may be a little bit hard rock, but mostly it's straight up distorted guitar rock. The CDs are sliding down here. Not really too heavy or too harsh. You know how it is, right, with those early Whitesnake albums. I actually quite liked Come and Get It, which was the first Whitesnake album I ever got. So that style there. And then, of course, you know, after the big success of Slide It In, they then went on a 3-year hiatus because David Coverdale had some throat troubles, I understood. And then they came out with the Whitesnake album and totally changed over into like a hair metal band type style, which actually had a lot of good stuff on it too. Then later on, David Coverdale did another album, solo album, Into the Light. There were some really lovely ballads on here. And it's a little bit different from Whitesnake, but there was another album he did with Whitesnake. I forget the title now. It's just him on the cover, which doesn't really sound like a Whitesnake album. Probably could have been something like this. But anyway, David Coverdale, Into the Light. And of course, during the 90s, he also teamed up with Jimmy Page to do Coverdale Page. Did this actually have a title? No, just Coverdale Page, which is, of course, David Coverdale singing, Jimmy Page's guitar style playing, and if you like that, then it's pretty cool. Okay, that's it for David Coverdale. We're going to move on now to the next Mark IV lineup when Ritchie Blackmore decided he was going to leave the band and they had to get in a new guitarist, and they brought in Tommy Bolin. So, what have we got from Tommy Bolin? Well, previously he'd been in a band called Zephyr. This was their debut album. I think they released 2 albums. And they had a vocalist here called, I think her name is Cindy Givens, who was often compared to Janis Joplin. However, my personal taste, Janis Joplin, I much prefer. Cindy's vocals on here, there are times where I just find they're way over the top, and I don't really like it. But when I wrote a review on Amazon about my purchase about this, somebody commented and saying that when he was young, Cindy was the thing, and all the guys were hot for her, and you know, if I don't like her, well then maybe I just didn't understand. Okay, well whatever. Anyway, but the music on here is pretty good. It's again this early 70s guitar rock based music, and there's some really cool stuff on here played by Mr. Tommy Bolin. So Zephyr, yeah. And then, well, I guess what I should do is, now I'll move on to this one here. Tommy's his debut album, solo album, Teaser, which came out around the same time as Deep Purple's Come Taste the Band. Both were released in, was it 75 or 76? Oh dear, suddenly I don't remember. But anyway, apparently during the Deep Purple tours, they actually allowed him to play a couple of songs from his solo album, and he was very gracious about that. He, in some letter somewhere or to someone, he said that they've been kind enough to let me play, so they're really great guys to let him do his solo stuff. So he did that, and then he did one more album, Private Eyes, where he has actually, this is his name written in kanji. This is Tomi, as in Tomioka, I think, and Bolin, which actually this means like a grave and woods. Interesting. Anyway, so that was his second album. Both of them are really good. There are a lot of songs on there that I really like. Probably the first one more than the second. Post Toasty is interesting. I think it is a kind of warning about if your friends are on drugs, you should do something about it. And then, unfortunately, Tommy was actually one of those people who was, whoops, on drugs. See, did I speak ill of the dead? So I might as well go on with this one here then. This is Tommy Bolin, a kind of a double compact disc retrospective featuring rare text and photographs. So, let's see where to put this. There is this nice booklet inside explaining about his career, his childhood and his early days and leading up to Deep Purple and his solo albums and so on. And then you get these 2 discs as well. This actually came used off the internet. I tracked a used one down. And this covers a lot of stuff like Zephyr, including a couple of tracks from the second album where I think Cindy Givens' vocals are much, much better. There were other ones here. Mind Transplant. And, sorry, that was an album by Alphonse Mouzon. Oh yeah, he played with Alphonse Mouzon. He's also on, of course, with Deep Purple, his solo stuff. He was with Bang, the James Gang, on an album called Bang, which I actually had on CD, but the only 2 songs I liked on it are included on here, so I sold it off again. Yeah, the other ones from Zephyr, James Gang, Billy Cobham, and Moxie. There was a story about that where the Canadian hard rock band Moxie were recording in California, and the lead guitarist and the producer got in a number of arguments, and finally the producer threw him out, and they said, we've got to get somebody in to play the lead guitar, and Tommy Bolin happened to be in one of the nearby studios in the complex, so he was invited in, and Tommy Bolin apparently plays all the lead guitar solos on the Moxie debut album, which I talked about in a previous video about 70s hard rock from Canada. Okay, give me a second to shuffle this around then. So one other one about Tommy Bolin, this is called Whips and Roses. This is session outtakes, alternative versions, and previously unreleased songs, remixed and remastered. The sound on this is really great, but it is also very loud. And what is interesting is that this is before I knew about the loudness war. It's loud, but it's clear. It sounds good. It's just when you're listening to it in the headphones, you gotta knock the volume down a bit after listening to some other albums, especially like the Teaser album, which is quite quiet. But there are some other versions of songs from the Teaser album. Is that a mosquito? Psh, psh, psh. And I actually like this one quite a bit. I got the Whips and Roses 2, but it didn't really have anything that I liked, so I just put it in the computer and sold off the disc. Okay, Tommy Bolin. Alright, well, as you know, Deep Purple Mark II got back together in 1984 and released the Perfect Strangers album. And Ian Gillan, Roger Glover, they were back together with the band. Then Ian Gillan was out of the band, as I mentioned in the previous video. He was, I don't know, he had problems anyway, probably with Richie again. He was not happy, he was drinking too much, and Richie said he's not performing well enough, so let's get him out. And Richie decided to replace him with a singer of his choice, his previous colleague in Rainbow, Lynn Turner. And what's interesting is the album Masters and Slaves and Masters that came out in 1989, 1990 of Deep Purple was interesting because you have the Deep Purple members of Ritchie Blackmore, John Lord, Ian Pace, Roger Glover, and then Lynn Turner on vocals. But if you go back to Rainbow in the early 90s, you had Ritchie Blackmore, Lynn Turner, and Roger Glover in the band at that time. And also you can think about at that time in Whitesnake, you also had Ian Pace and Roger Glover. So it's kind of like taking early 80s Rainbow and early 80s Whitesnake and putting them together. Anyway, a lot of people were not happy with Lynn Turner being in the band. Apparently the band themselves, not because they were really unhappy with him exactly, but just the rest of the members knew that Deep Purple needed Ian Gillan as the vocals. So anyway, let's talk a little bit about Lynn Turner. In the early 70s, he played in a band called Fandango. They had 4 albums, which are, the covers are back here. I actually had the debut, but again, the songs that I liked on the debut are on this compilation album, and the rest of the ones on the debut that are not on here, I didn't really care for. So I just stuck with this one. So I get the best of the 4 albums, the best of Fandango. This is a typical late 70s American rock band. You've got the distorted guitar, but it's not really heavy. Kind of like Journey without Steve Perry or Neil Schon. But anyway, it's, you know, early recordings of Lynn Turner before he went off and joined Rainbow. So there are some good enough songs on here, I think. Kind of all over the place now. It looks like I have Brazen Abbott here, which has Lynn Turner as a guest. That I just happen to have with my Lynn Turner collection, it seems. Lynn Turner, geez, where did you go, man? I got all this other stuff that he did. He was on Yngwie Malmsteen's Rising Force album. I think he might have also been vocals on one other album. So there's that. In the 90s, he was in a band called Mother's Army. I think there were 3 albums. I have 2 of them, Planet Earth and Fire on the Moon. A little bit different from one another. One is a little bit more solid, hard rock with an aggressive edge, and one is slightly more melodic and almost progressive in some ways. But I believe the lineup includes somebody from Night Ranger. Was it Jack Blades? Or was it Brad Gills? I forget. And then I think it's Carmen Apice on Jeff Watson. Jeff Watson and Bob Daisley. And then Carmen Apice and Lynn Turner. Yeah. So I had to track these down to get a hold of them, but they're actually pretty good. Like I quite like them, especially the more harder, gurry, aggressive type songs on there. Strong environmental themes though. A lot of the songs are about environmental abuse. So Mother's Army, Mother Earth's Army. Okay, looks like Lynn Turner was also in, I think it was a Swedish band called Sunstorm. Again, kind of melodic, not really metal, but unless you want to call it melodic heavy metal. Almost like what was coming out at the end of the 80s there, like when hair bands started to get a little heavier, but was still quite melodic. Kind of like what James LaBrie was in with that Winter Rose Band, something like that. Anyway, good, heavy but melodic songs, and those kind of, I guess, those Swedish melodic vocals like Europe or something like that. But it's Lynn Turner on here, and this one here has some good tracks I really liked. Here we go. So here's after Rainbow, and he did his first solo album, which is not really all that to my taste, but anyway, it has some okay stuff on there. Rescue You, Lynn Turner's debut. Couple of other Lynn Turner albums. Let's see here, Undercover. This is one of his, he did cover songs, some good ones on there. Lynn Turner, Holy Man, some pretty good solid hard rockers on there. I think some power ballads. Lynn Turner, Slam. Yeah, all of these Lynn Turner albums, they all have some hard and heavy stuff that's not like really heavy metal, but just hard and heavy with melodies and good catchy choruses sometimes, or kind of more like in your face type, you know, you piss me off type of don't step on my toes type of thing, and power ballads. This one here, the opening track, Your Love Is Life, is just one of those, wow, let's all sing along and have a great time. Secondhand Life album. So yeah, I think I liked Lynn Turner enough to check him out to this point, and after that I thought, okay, more or less the albums follow a similar course, and that's maybe good enough for me. I'm not that wild a fan, but I do like his vocal style. Okay, Lynn Turner. All right, we are going to move on to who joined next? Steve Morse, because of course Ritchie Blackmore was out of the band once again. Shuffling the CDs here. So yes, Ritchie Blackmore was out of Deep Purple. He said, that's it, I can't take this anymore. Ian Gillan, we're just not getting along. I'm going to go do something else. He reformed Rainbow, and as one of the backup vocals, he had a female vocalist called Carol Knight in. I think it was Carol Knight, right? And then they decided, hey, let's do something totally different. Let's form a Renaissance type band. And so Blackmore's Night was born, and I did buy a few of the albums. Shadow of the Moon, Fires at Twilight, Village Lantern, which is actually the one I think I like best, and later on Secret Voyages. All of them have tracks that I like. Some of them have more tracks that I like than others. Some of them have tracks I don't really care for. But certainly there is an interesting take on music there. This Renaissance style, when Ritchie's playing some acoustic guitar solos in a kind of rock style fashion. It's really cool. So certainly there's some interesting stuff going on here, and that's what he's doing, and he's happy doing it, and I think he's still doing it now. Good for him. Okay, so he was out. They needed a guitarist. Joe Satriani came in to fill in for the tour, and then to get someone permanent in on the lineup, this guy here, Steve Morse. We're looking at Dixie Dregs from the 1970s. Kind of a rock, jazz, fusion type progressive band. I can't say everything is to my taste, but man, there's certainly some great playing on here, great compositions. Steve Morse, awesome on guitar. Already we're hearing some wonderful, almost like shredding type solos in these early Dixie Dregs days. Dregs of the Earth, love the cover. And the text is really small on here because it's done like an album. What is it called now? The Great Spectacular. Great guitar playing in that. But Dixie Dregs, and then later on just changed their name to Dregs, industry standard. Again, some cool tracks on here, but the recording volume on this is really low. It's got to be turned up a lot. I'm making a pile here now. And then, of course, we've got Steve Morse Band, the introduction. I actually have somewhere in here, I don't know, I actually have Kansas Power, which is the first Kansas album I ever bought, and the only one I had for the longest time, because Steve Morse played with Kansas for 2 albums, and I got Power, and it has kind of an interesting 80s, classic 70s band in the 80s, still a bit prog, still trying to do their thing and remain relevant, and some good songs, but not one of Kansas's more well-known albums. So anyway, after that we also had Steve Morse and his solo album. Then he actually quit the business for a while, got a pilot's license, flew up to Canada one day, joined Triumph in the studio, and recorded with them for 2 songs off their Surveillance album of 1987. And then finally around 1990 he went and did a solo album called High Tension Wires, which is an eclectic mix of songs, but some really beautiful stuff. Man, he's got short hair there. That's probably the only time you ever see Steve Morse with short hair. I guess because he was a pilot. Hard to get all that hair under the pilot's hat, I guess. But the very opening track here, Ghost Wind, I just love that one. Really beautiful piece of music. And let's see here, what do we have now? Steve Morse Band, Southern Steel, I believe it is. Steve Morse Band, Structural Damage. These 2 are both really cool albums. Just 3 members, all of them super talented and just playing fantastic music. And they had one album called Outstanding in Their Field, and the 3 members were outstanding in a field. Nice. A bit of humor. Steve Morse did this one, Prime Cuts. Oh, Magna Carta Sessions. Right. So what he did here was he took various inspirations of his. Was that this one? Yeah. That's what it is. That's what it is. This one and this one. Prime cuts and major impacts. He was inspired, of course, by various guitarists such as Steve Howe or Jimmy Page, Jeff Beck, and so he tried to write songs or compose songs in those musicians' playing style, but original compositions. And I think he pulled it off rather well. You can certainly hear when it's a Jimmy Page song or when it's a Jimi Hendrix song and a Rush song. So that's really neat. I think one of them is... No, that's it. That's exactly what this is. Yep. Okay. It's yeah, Steve Morse. Awesome. Okay, I'm going to move this stack a little bit and then get on to the last bit. All right, coming up to the end of it, the final person to join Deep Purple, joining in the early 2000s, Jon Lord injured his hand during, I don't know, he injured his hand. I don't remember why. And they brought in Don Airey to take over for a bit. And then Jon Lord said, you know what, guys, I think I'm going to retire from Deep Purple, which he did, and went off to do some more solo albums, which we talked about in the last video. And Don Airey then was invited to stay as the band's keyboard player because they said replacing Jon Lord, there are very few choices. And Don Airey is an excellent choice. Now, I'm going to go over some of his albums here, but he has quite an outstanding career behind him. He originally, I think his first professional recording was with a Cozy Powell, on a Cozy Powell album. And then I believe it was around that time he joined up with Gary Moore and Colosseum 2, Strange New Flesh. This was the one of 3 Colosseum 2 albums and the only one to feature vocals. The opening track, Dark Side of the Moog, features some excellent playing by Gary Moore on guitar and some great stuff from Don Airey on keyboards. And man, the drummer is actually from the original Colosseum. I can't remember his name now. And it's probably in here, and the text is small. Here we go. Neil Murray is on bass, and then John Heisman is on drums. And just 4 brilliant musicians just playing incredible music on here. I really wanted to get the other 2 albums. At the time, they were not available on CD, except used at a very high price. The best thing I could do was get the best of Gary Moore, Streets and Walkways, and Colosseum 2. So some of the tracks on here, I think 3 or 4 tracks are from each of the other 2 Colosseum albums. Very progressive type music, styled music from the late 70s. That's cool. Don Airey, then, of course, he was in Rainbow. He was on the Difficult to Cure album, the actual title track where there's this awesome keyboard solo in the middle. That's Don Airey. He did vocals, again I said vocals. He did keyboards on Ozzy Osbourne albums, and Mr. Crowley, that whole keyboard opening at the beginning, that is Don Airey as well. That was kind of really cool to find out. Moore, he appeared in the 80s on Gary Moore albums. He appeared with Whitesnake. He actually appeared doing keyboards for Judas Priest's Painkiller, and his connection that he made with Glenn Tipton at the time got him to appear as the keyboard player on 2 Glenn Tipton albums later on. Glenn Tipton did one with John Entwistle and Cozy Powell, and Don Airey did the keyboards for that. Don Airey did. Here's a Gary Moore album, Still Got the Blues. I bought because I thought Gary Moore was actually pretty good. He's not exactly what I would go for, but I actually think this album here is really good for a blues album. I actually had 2 of his other albums in the 80s, which I thought were quite good, but they really didn't stay with me. But Don Airey and Gary Moore, apparently, solid connection, worked together a lot after Colosseum 2. Don Airey in the 80s did K2, Tales of Triumph and Tragedy, which is a very much 80s sounding album, and it gets points for being a kind of progressive album and featuring some great musicians and great music, but just the overall sound doesn't really appeal to me. However, this does get a lot of good, strong, high ratings. Then, much more later on, Don Airey, A Light in the Sky. Now this album I really like. And this one just has such a beautiful array of music on here, going from the kind of very heavy, growly Hammond organ keyboards for, I think it's Pale Blue, Big Crunch, Lost the End of Time, Pale Blue Dot, I think it is Pale Blue Dot. Some of the other tracks as well. Then there's like excellent classical piano type solos, piano and violin just playing off each other. Songs like more heavy rock songs with powerful vocals in there. Yeah, it's and some like instrumentals with kind of like spacey effects or whatever, like something you'd hear at the planetarium. I really like this album, Don Airey, Light in the Sky, and I listened to it again the other day to remind myself that I really liked it. And one other thing that turned up here, the Company of Snakes, which is Mickey Moody and so Bernie Marsden, wasn't it? Mickey Moody and Bernie Marsden, I think it was. It is. Mickey Moody and Bernie Marsden, original or early guitarist for Whitesnake, put together this Company of Snakes, and Don Airey plays on here as well. I also had the Cozy Powell album Over the Top, which I think most of the music was actually written by Don Airey, but it really didn't impress me. It's not what I had expected it to be. So that's also gone. Okay, that is pretty much all I have to tell you about that. That is my Deep Purple family collection, as I put together between 2006 and 2008. I never did find that folder I was talking about at the beginning of part 1 to this video. So instead, I'll show you my Perfect Strangers, Deep Purple Perfect Strangers pin, which I bought back in 1984 and is still on my guitar strap, safely packed away in the closet because I haven't played guitar for quite some time. Ever since, while tuning it, I broke the nut. But anyway, okay. I do tend to talk a lot at the end of my videos, trying to find a good place to finish them off. So I'm just going to finish it off now. I hope you found something interesting in these last 2 videos. Maybe learned something, maybe remembered something. And once again, I'm just pulling everything I say out of my head that's been stuffed away in there for the last 12 years or so. So if I made any mistakes, go ahead, correct me in the comments. All right, take care everyone. I'll be back with another video when I have time. Thank you for watching today. Bye.